Hi, I'm David with EV World News. We're talking about electric vehicles, green energy, and the stock markets. And I'm back today with our founder and chief editor, Bill Moore. How's it going today, Bill?
I am just marvelous, thank you.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm glad to hear it. And I'm actually thinking I might go mow a little grass after this.
Oh
You
yeah, well
never
I've
know.
yeah I've got a little patch over here that probably could use some trimming. Yes, speaking of mowing grass, you know this pampas grass,
Hmm.
this stuff that grows up, 10 feet or whatever it is. I cut the first batch of it yesterday. Whew, that's work. I'm getting too old to get down on my knees and cut the roots off, cut the top off of actually the base off of pampas grass so it'll grow back. And that's
Well,
only the first one. I've got a bin full of the stuff, and I still got two other pampas grass patches that I also need to work on over the next couple weeks. So, yeah, lots of fun. Hire a
well,
tortoise.
yeah, that's kind of the premise of some. I know somebody who makes automated hybrid lawnmowers. They're they're electric and gas combo
Uh
down in
huh.
Florida, and he sells these, and they're autonomous, and they run around like a golf course, not a golf course, like graveyards. So they
Okay,
memorize where all the
sure.
headstones are, and they
Right.
go in between, and they look kind of like a giant, sea tortoise running around eating the grass. But there you go. But the tortoise would be Soviet technology.
You know what? Put some biotech technology in that thing so it doesn't just spit out grass clippings. It eats them, digests them, poops out the back to fertilize the lawn, and gives the energy. Never have to plug it in. Wow, that is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, so the autonomous lawnmower would be the U.S. government making something for $100,000. The tortoise would be the Soviet solution
So
to do
it's,
it for free.
yeah, exactly. No. Is that what tortoises eat? They just, well, I assume that they're
Uh,
vegetarian.
we assume they eat grass. We don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows? Anyways, um, let's start out with talking about our favorite subject, tariffs. Okay, so
Let's
we
talk
keep having
about tariffs.
one day we have tariffs, one day we don't. One day
One
we
day
have tariffs, one day we don't. It's
I'm
definitely a
getting
seesaw.
I'm getting whiplash, my friend. Whiplash.
Yeah. Last week Stellantis laid off 900 U.S. workers over the tariffs, although I guess they must have been manufacturing something the U.S. was going to export. I really don't know. Um, but they were 900 U.S. workers. They were pausing production at assembly plant in Mexico and Canada. It's definitely causing some confusion for
No
manufacturers, that's for
kidding.
sure.
No kidding. Holy crap. And it's only 90-day pause. So what are you going to do with that?
Well,
What, you're
they've
going to
had
bring it back in
70
90
countries.
days or
70 countries have reached out on how to renegotiate
well,
the
yeah,
tariff
that's their
situation.
story. That's their story. I'm given their track record, I'm a little skeptical of that.
Well, I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see what comes out. Um, let's see. Half of the cars sold in the US last year were brought in from abroad. Now, that being said, so the US is the
What
largest
is
importer of cars.
what does abroad mean? Does that mean
Abroad,
you cross a border or you bring them across an ocean?
well, I think that simply means that you import them. It, I think you could even classify, to me, abroad means it came from over the sea,
Yeah, to me too.
okay?
That's what I'm
But not
assuming.
necessarily from Mexico, but apparently it could be more narrowly nailed down to, I think Mexico and Canada would be considered abroad. But to
Abroad,
me,
yeah.
if I said I went abroad, that would mean you know,
I went to Paris or I went to Rome or
yeah,
somewhere like that. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I would assume it was something more like that. Um, yeah, so
Didn't Mark Twain have a book, Innocence Abroad? Yeah, he did. Innocence Abroad. When he and a bunch of people took a tour of the grand tour of Europe. So
yeah, so anyways, Yeah, going to Mars might be more than going abroad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Oh,
but
speaking of which, did you know? I wasn't aware of this. That Elon's Roadster, right, the one he sent into orbit,
yeah.
does in fact intersect with the orbit of Mars on a periodic basis. I didn't realize it. So it actually, I don't know whether it would ever. It's set to collide with Mars at some point in the future, but it does go clear out to the orbit of Mars. They intersect.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That there probably was some weird, he always seems to have some deeper meaning in a lot of stuff he does. Who
yeah,
knows? Like the
yeah.
whole thing with the S3XY,
Oh
you
yeah, well
know,
that was obvious from the start. Once he announced the X, I figured that's what he was up to. And he couldn't get the E. Do you know why he couldn't get the actual E and had to do those three
Mercedes.
slashes? What's that?
Mercedes?
No, Ford had it.
Oh,
Ford had already copyrighted the E, believe it or not.
huh. Yeah, I guess I never
So he
really
had to go with the three slashes.
yeah. Oh, yeah, got it. So 4,500 workers at a plant in Windsor, I guess that's Ontario,
That's
where
Ontario. Yeah, it's across
yeah,
the
where they
from
make the
Detroit.
Chrysler Pacifica and
Yeah.
Voyager minivans and the Dodge Charger Daytona, will be down for 2 weeks. It impacts 4,500 Canadian workers. Well, I don't know what to think. I want to see how a lot of this plays out. Of course, this was all before that. This news was happened before they announced the 90-day pause.
All right.
Um, Nissan now is saying it won't take new U.S. orders for Mexican-built Infinities. So apparently, the Infinity brand is made in Mexico. See, I look at so many Nissans and I think of there's two big Nissan plants in Tennessee and Mississippi. And so I usually think of Nissan being a southern US brand.
Yeah.
And
Well, they moved their headquarters from Southern California to Tennessee.
did
That was
they?
a Oh yeah, that was a big move back in the mid-teens. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, but yeah, Smyrna, Tennessee. Nissan says it'll continue maintaining two shifts at its Rogue SUV, the place where it makes the Rogue SUV in Smyrna. Um,
Yeah, see a lot of those
Although they
around
had
here.
said previously back in January they were planning on ending one of the shifts, and now they're not. Um, but they're saying they're not going to accept any additional orders of the QX50 and QX55 SUVs that are made in Mexico at a plant that runs together with Mercedes-Benz.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but it said production is expected to continue for those models sold to other markets. So the 25% tariff. I never really think about Infinity. I forget that they even exist.
Yeah,
They're not like
yeah.
a company that comes up much. I don't think.
Well, you think of
I'm,
Acura.
I think it's another brand that struggled in the United States.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
occasionally see one of the big Infinity SUVs, but that's, otherwise they're probably hard to
Well, it's
notice.
kind of like Mitsubishi too. Mitsubishi's been here for a long time, but they're one
All
of
right,
those
Bill.
brands that struggled. So,
Let's talk about the really exciting news about the London electric cabs. Now,
oh, I'm glad you
um,
brought that. I'm glad. Good. All right. I came across
I'm
this. I thought
debating,
I'd share it.
this has got to be, is this AI or a real photo?
No, that's a real photo. No, no,
Okay.
no. That's a real photo. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
So,
are there? There's probably a couple of dozen, of those horseless carriages. Those are the electric taxis. They were called the Hummingbird, and they launched service in 1897.
yep.
Imagine that electric, because all you had back then was horse-drawn carriages, right?
They were called the Hummingbird
Yeah,
because
they
of
were
their
called the
quiet
Hummingbird.
operation.
Yeah. Now the interesting thing is this article points out that these were silent, right? And they got away
Hmm.
from the noisy horses.
Yep.
How noisy is a horse, right? Clip clop, clip clop, clip clop on the brick streets, right? That's the extent. The horse noise wasn't the problem, as we've talked about before.
No, it was the horse crap.
The horse shit was the problem, and the
Yeah.
horse pee, the urine.
Hmm.
The horses will, pee on a day. I think it was like 4 or 5 gallons of urine flowing into the gutters and the streets. Yeah, and then how many pounds of manure? And of course, they had people that actually that was your job. You went around and picked up the manure, and that got put in a wagon, and then the wagon got taken out to the countryside where I imagine it was spread because a lot of the produce that was grown for the markets, and remember My Fair Lady, right? And she's down there selling flowers in the Covent Garden area. And they call it Covent Garden because that's where the produce that was grown outside the city was brought in and sold to retail customers or to wholesalers. So they probably took that horse shit. We're not FCC controlled here, so I can use what kind of language I want, I guess. But anyway, and they took that and they spread that on the fields, and that would be for their, whatever crops that the particular market gardener was growing. It was that was actually really, when you think about it, that wasn't too bad an idea. Talk about a circular economy.
Right. Yeah, we lost that aspect.
We lost that when we went to electric. Dang it.
Well, one of the weird things is horses were dangerous. Okay, so when they're pulling the wagons and stuff, it's not that easy to just make the horse stop, and they'd hit people and kill them.
Yeah.
And,
well, as you could say that for cars too, obviously.
Right. But it's really funny because apparently, from what I understand, there's less accidents, with pedestrians getting killed by cars than there were with horses. Although we're going to talk about pedestrians getting whacked by trains later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Of course, the other part of the real problem with the horses was that the horses, of course, they required not, you could take this taxi and put it in a garage and plug it into the local grid, right? This horse-drawn thing here. The horse, you had to take it and put it in a stall. You had to clean it. You had to brush it. You had to wash it off, right? You had to get it clean. And then you had to keep it from dying of diseases. Back in, the late 1880s, 1890s, they had this, I think it was a horse cholera or something like that went around and killed thousands of horses, which were left either, dying, waiting for what they called, in England, they called the knacker to come along and haul this thing off and, cut it up into dog meat or whatever they ended up doing with it. So that was the problem with the horse, was not only the effluence that it created, but the care it took to look after it, and then susceptibility to equine diseases. Didn't have that with that taxi. Only thing you had to worry about there was the occasional breakdown and keeping that battery charged.
Yep, and I'm wondering if they were using battery swap technology or if they were using regular charging technology.
I don't know, but the ones I think in Philadelphia that they started, which was about the same time as this, did have a battery swapping system. So they may have had this. Actually, this is the first I've heard of the one in London, the Hummingbird system in London.
Now, when gasoline first came to market, it was incredibly cheap. And it actually, at that point, it was actually cheaper. I think once they first started introducing gas cars, I think they were actually cheaper to power than.
Well, you had, but you had to go to an apothecary. You had to go to a pharmacy to buy it. Originally, did you know that?
To get your first fuel?
To get your first fuel, you had to go to a pharmacy to get the fuel.
That's kind of
At least
funny.
This is the story I've heard. So.
Yeah,
whether that's fable or not.
Yeah, pretty good. Anyways, yeah, and it's just fascinating that when you think back that there's been electric vehicles for a while. It's not
for
like
a long time. Yeah, commercial. This wasn't just Henry Ford playing around with something in 1904, right?
Right.
These were before. I'm sure I think he was probably tinkering with this stuff earlier. And so, of course, so was Carl Benz and the guys over in Germany and France. They were probably tinkering with this stuff about the same time. But these are commercial services. with several, looks like several dozen, I didn't bother to count them, but it looks like several dozen taxis operating out of a central depot in London. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Coca-Cola was, when it had the cocaine in it, it was definitely a little bit more of a kick. But you look at
Yeah.
if you look at like pharmacy labels from the 1800s, you see marijuana on a lot of them. You see, and you see cocaine. And then the other thing was they used to use whiskey for a lot of conditions, because you could
Yeah,
clean something with it.
what was the one laudanum? That was a big one.
Which one?
It's called laudanum. It was a narcotic,
Hmm.
and it was used. Ladies for their when they were what was the term that they used?
PMSing.
Well, when they were what the term they thought, because women are so flighty and so sensitive, right? So they had these whatever these episodes were. Okay, maybe the ladies were
Hysteria.
having their period and being real sensitive. Right, that was all being exaggerated back then. So they would carry around little vials of laudanum, which was basically, it wasn't cocaine. It was I think it was a diluted version of heroin.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
yeah.
they used poppies and all
And
that
this,
other.
and this, by the way, goes back to Napoleonic era, because one of my favorite authors is Patrick O'Brien and his series of novels about naval warfare during the Napoleonic period. Right, the movie Master and Commander was based on a couple of his books.
Mhm.
With oh, come on now, I can't think of the actor's name right now, but anyway, but the doctor who served as the ship's surgeon was addicted to laudanum, and that's how he made it through the day. When he was needed some relief, he would bring out his little vial of laudanum and prescribe it to himself. So
Nice, nice. All right, we'll move back into more modern
yeah, let's
times.
get back.
Yeah.
Get out of
So
those
that
ships of
that was
shale. So
old news
that
from
was the old news.
127 years ago,
Yeah.
and now let's talk a little bit about this Foxconn deal. So Foxconn makes iPhones. They're an iPhone maker in both China and Taiwan, but
Okay.
they're a Taiwanese company,
Right.
and they're looking. They announced at a press conference yesterday that they're planning to produce six new battery electric models, two for the U.S. markets, with the first one set to arrive as early as late 2025. Now, they're not going to produce these in China, so they because they're a Taiwanese company,
Yeah.
so they have some advantages there. But they bought Lordstown Motors Ohio production facility a few years ago, and they plan to build vehicles for other um, automakers, and including they were looking at making something for Lordstown, a pickup truck, and a Fisker model called the Pear, and those never panned out. But Foxconn's still interested. And here is
You
it's
know the
not a
story of
bad
the
looking
Lord's.
vehicle. Looks a little a lot of EVs look futuristic, right?
Yeah.
You know, this one's
Well,
not
that's the
bad
whole
looking.
point of the design exercise.
Honestly, it looks like a Hyundai. Okay, but the
Yeah, probably the same
Hyundai
design studio.
is kind of on that cutting edge. Well, I look at the wheels; those look like Hyundai wheels,
Oh, yeah, wouldn't
and
surprise me.
that's a lot of it, and just the shape that Hyundai uses on a lot of vehicles. But this is Foxconn. This is a cell phone manufacturer, so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of funny when you there is certainly a gap. We're talking about EVs being more technologically advanced than regular gas cars. But you
Mm-hmm.
look at, we've got cell phone companies coming into the EV space because
Why
EVs
not?
may be closer related to a cell phone
Yeah.
than they are to a gas car.
It's just a big rolling cell phone. Yeah.
Yeah, because in reality, gas cars as we know it are incredibly complex machines with thousands of moving parts,
Thousands of parts.
and
Yep.
EVs are not. It really has dumbed down the automobile to a certain extent by reducing the number of things that need maintenance. There's just so many things that's changed out in terms of just a basic electric motor with, without most, there's very few EVs have any kind of transmission. There's a couple of them that do now, but for the most part, they don't have a transmission. There's so many things that they just
Yeah.
don't have, and that's good. I mean, for you as an owner and driver of one, it's just less things to have to fix,
Yep.
and
Absolutely.
it makes a lot of sense. But that's a nice looking vehicle. I can't tell if that's like that looks like it could be big enough to be a three-row vehicle, but who
Yeah.
knows?
Very, very possibly. Yeah.
They're going to call them the
That seems to be
Foxtron.
the trend. So.
Yeah, they're going to call it the Foxtron. The Foxtron Model C will be a crossover. It's already being sold in Taiwan, and it should hit the US by the end of 2025. And the Model D, a multi-purpose vehicle designed by Pininfarina, expected by
Yeah.
2027.
Yeah.
Both will be built in Taiwan and exported globally, although Foxconn has hinted at producing in Lordstown, but that hasn't been confirmed.
Yeah.
Um,
The Lords, by the way, the Lordstown plant was originally a General Motors plant.
mhm.
They then sold it to God, who was it now? Another a up and coming, EV maker or hopeful EV maker, and then that ended up what Workhorse or somebody ended up, or maybe
Mhm.
it was Workhorse that took it over, and we're going to come up with their own Workhorse
Well, I
brand
think
of
there's other manufacturers. I think they make RVs and
yeah
buses and
yeah
stuff like that in Lordstown at different
yeah.
facilities.
So it's been through a couple of cycles, and I'm sure for the people that lived and worked there would like to see somebody get in there and actually turn out a product that can pay them a living wage. So yeah, it'll be interesting to watch that.
Yeah, it'll be good to see. But it's interesting seeing more companies jump into it. Obviously, when we see non-Chinese companies manufacturing EVs, that certainly makes it more attractive for the U.S. market that's trying to
Yeah,
get away or trying to avoid the Chinese EV manufacturer. But we look at Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea.
yeah. I wonder, they what would be the chances of them because Japan already does this, has some significant manufacturing partnerships with India, and we know that Tesla has been up and down as to whether or not they're going to actually produce cars there, or just going to sell them there, or whatever. It would be interesting. It wouldn't surprise me if they're building it said for multiple manufacturers, if they wouldn't go in there and cut some kind of a deal with the Indian government and some of the Indian car manufacturers to produce maybe the rolling platform for them, that type of thing.
Yeah, well, it would make sense, right? I mean,
Yeah.
India certainly got the population. There's no information really on what kind of price ranges or anything like that.
It's too early for that. Yeah, that
Yeah,
won't happen until they're ready to introduce it into a particular market, and then a month or two ahead of time they'll have the reveal and get all the press and the media in, and then they'll say, here's the price that we're going to be charging in whatever market they're introducing it in.
but much like Xiaomi with their SU7, they're another cell phone maker that's
Yep,
jumped into
yep,
the EV space.
yep.
We kept thinking Apple was going to get into the EV space. They certainly did some
BYD
work.
BYD began as a cell phone battery manufacturer.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So, there seems to be a natural progression. Once you understand the chemistry and what makes an electric vehicle move, not much of a step to, or from a cell phone, let's say, not that big a step to go hire a bunch of, automotive engineers and go to the Italians at Pininfarina and say, hey, design me a really sexy car, and they do the job for them.
All right. So let's delve into the wild world of railroads. So the article you sent me from
Yeah.
the New Republic says what Republicans don't want you to know
Yeah,
about private high-speed
I
rail.
thought that was a little bit
Yeah,
clickbaity,
I
so
don't
I
know
thought
that
I'd
any
share
of
it with you.
I don't know that any of these railroads have much to do with right or left politics, but so a company project praised by Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy operates the deadliest section of railway in the country. Now, I got to tell you, we're going to talk about the Bright Line Railroad
And you've
and
ridden
what
on
they're
it.
doing down in Florida.
Yeah.
But I have ridden the Bright Line a few times,
Right.
and one of the neat things about it is its rails are out in the open. They're not protected by fences or anything like that. And it runs by a lot of bars. I, okay. I mean, that's
Well,
I
yeah.
mean, you're not really, this isn't a streetcar. Okay. So
Right.
you're not taking it down a couple blocks and you're going to take it from like Fort Lauderdale to Aventura or to Miami or up to Boca Raton or something like that. It
Or
doesn't,
Orlando, which was the
well,
northern
they do
end.
have that
So,
now too. They have
yeah.
Orlando. But
Yeah.
what I'm getting at is it's not like you're going a mile. You're going,
Right.
these are at least
What
five,
is
10 miles.
Yeah.
It's
What is it
going
between? Yeah. What is it between the southern end and the Orlando? What is that? 150 miles or so?
at least, and it would take
Yeah.
you forever to drive that.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's like a 3.5 hour train ride. But it would,
The the
um,
the in that distance, I thought this was interesting. There are 315 crossing points.
mhm.
315 points of which you can have somebody not paying attention or somebody thinking they can beat the crossing bar or whatever, right? Or just simply being too dumb to recognize that, hey, there's a train coming. So yeah, they've had what?
Well,
Well, we've already talked about deadest,
yeah. So
miles.
they've had 100 people die from getting hit by the Bright Line Railroad, and I'm
Yeah.
sitting here thinking, well, maybe that's natural selection. I don't know. I mean,
Well,
uh,
come on, yeah. The point that the author, and of course, New Republic is a very left-leaning publication. All right, they're looking for, I think, any opportunity they can to sort of stick it to the Republicans, and they note that to build a proper crossing, and the Federal Railroad Administration has told them this. You need to work on this to build a proper railroad crossing, either an overpass or an underpass. It's $40 million. One. And the Federal Railroad Administration says, hey, you got 31 places where you ought to have that. So multiply 31 times
it's
40,
1.2 billion.
$40 million. Yeah. And of course, the point is that, this is a private commercial, enterprise, and they're going to try to find places to cut costs anywhere they can. Whereas if it were Amtrak or federal, okay, well, maybe, we know
Well, when
they're,
I've been in Florida, I've walked back and forth across those railway lines a whole bunch of times, and I've
right.
not been real worried about getting hit by a train. I have been worried about getting hit by cars,
Yeah.
but not by trains there. Yeah, I don't know. It seems they've carried 3 million people, back and forth on the railroad, and they're complaining that
By the way, these are not electric, are they? These are diesels?
are they?
Well, I
Yeah,
don't know. That's what I'm asking. You've ridden on it.
yeah, I never thought to check.
So
Um,
there's no I didn't see any. Are there overhead catenary
no, there's
cables?
not.
So it's probably diesel then. Okay.
Yeah, diesel electric, right?
Well, diesels are, yeah, they're always electric.
Yeah. But
A, a
Brightline is
series
apparently
a series hybrid, to be specific.
so. Sean Duffy had announced an investigation into the California High Speed Rails Authority's use of a $3.1 billion federal grant for its long awaited high speed rail system. The project was severely off track. But by comparison, he pointed to another rail project, Brightline West, a $12.4 billion 218-mile route under construction between LA and Las Vegas. Now, that's a private funded one, though.
Right.
So, and those are projects I think taxpayers are willing to invest in. And he praised the project for being on budget, on time, but it's already running behind schedule. Well, I've been in the construction business. Nothing's ever on time in the
Yeah.
construction space.
Seldom.
Um, Conservatives at the Manhattan Institute for Policy has similarly portrayed Brightline as proof that private models work better than public ones. But you know what? Without getting into politics here, I've gone and I've ridden on the Brightline, and like I've been really impressed with it. I mean, now the railroad terminals are all new, but if like you go into the airports and you get like a new terminal, or where Delta or somebody has
Hmm.
redone that section, the waiting area, and it's all new, that's what Brightline is like.
Right.
I mean, they're really, top notch.
It
They've got
it was
little.
it was wasn't built in the Roosevelt era administration,
Exactly.
right? It's not Art Deco like the Kansas City or the station that we had here, the Union Station here in Omaha, that's now been converted into a museum. And if you want to ride the train, Amtrak in Omaha, you go down to the track level and you sit under a. It looks like, I don't know what that thing is, but it's not a fancy terminal. It's just there to, got one train a day that you can get on at late at night, and ride the next day and arrive in Denver. So yeah, the era of the fancy train stations is been behind us for a while.
No, but I mean, they have an elegant setup. It's really more of almost business class level travel if you were
Yeah,
flying,
yeah.
or better. Um, I'm just saying it's nicely done, um, for whatever, and I'd have a hard time really criticizing them. And but they aren't running the trains very fast. They're not going 200 miles per hour like some of these other concepts.
Like the bullet trains in Japan, those
Now,
are so
apparently,
cool.
if Brightline West is supposed to go up to 200 miles per hour,
Yeah, so
so the one in
that'll be a
California,
high speed electric. Yeah, that'll be a bullet
yeah.
train type.
Um, oh,
And
and it has received.
but you'll notice, whereas the Bright Line in Florida runs through a heavily congested areas, right? Just a whole string of one city after another city, with lots of multiple crossing points, 315. Whereas I don't think going from LA to Las Vegas, you're going to have that many. And particularly if you're going to travel at a high, at bullet train speeds, that's going to be all, the right of way there's going to be all, there aren't going to be crossings.
Right,
Everything's either going to be an overpass or an underpass. So if they put the money into that, that'll be certainly a good thing.
and it has gotten public grants and loans. Okay, but that being said, I talk about this all the time because part of our show is talking about stocks. Okay, so
Right.
we talk about the economy, we talk about stocks, and I don't know who runs Brightline. I don't know any of their people. It'd probably be interesting to get them on and interview them at some point. But I feel, to me, they're people who can execute, and we talk about this all the time. People can criticize certain people they don't like, but in the business world, when somebody can execute, they get a lot of attention because people want to throw money at somebody who, when
That
they
can
come
get
up
the
with an
job done.
idea,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
without naming names, that they can execute and make things happen. And whoever is doing all this behind Brightline, I think is doing a pretty damn good job. I think they're hard to criticize. But look at like Amtrak. Amtrak is certainly not an American success story. But that being said, I mean, how many people really want to take the train from Omaha to Denver, right? I mean, I'm sure there's
That's
plenty of
why it
people.
runs in the middle of the night. Yeah,
Right,
you're an adventurer traveler. It's not, I mean, I worked for an airline for 10 years, right? And I could have taken the train, I guess, but why? Because I could fly there as an airline employee to Denver in an hour and 15 minutes, as opposed
right.
to riding all night on a clackety, 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 clack, on a train. But if that were the only, the infrastructure too, right? The
Mhm.
infrastructure, our current Amtrak rail system is running on is a century old or more.
Yeah.
So whereas the Bright Line, that's all new, bright, rail, I assume, and fairly new. Whereas the Amtrak and all that's all just old stuff. In fact, riding the Acela from Washington D.C., which I've done, up to New York, and then later on another excursion, I took it up to Providence, Rhode Island. There's one part in Maryland where the tunnel that it has to go through was built for steam locomotives in I think it was the 1880s or 1860s. It's some crazy. They're building a new tunnel now, thank God. But the reason that thing slows down, and instead of doing 90 miles an hour, it does 50 or 60. Just
Yeah.
old infrastructure.
So this article, they say that the Brightline, Florida, is the single deadliest railway per mile in the country, 3 times worse than the next mid-size or major rail. Now it's running through a very high population
That's my
area.
point. Exactly.
Yeah, and but a couple of things, and it talks about your estimate of $40 million per crossing. Um, you know, I don't know how you address that, and I didn't realize how fast Brightline was going. I just knew there was a train. I figured it was going like 30, 40 miles per hour. Apparently, on some of those routes, it's going up to 80, 85
Oh yeah,
miles
probably.
per
Yeah.
hour, and it's capable of 125 miles per hour, but
So it's
it
being
only does that.
underutilized.
There's only 35 miles a stretch it gets that fast for. So
Yeah,
I didn't, but I don't think I've ridden on that. That's probably on the way to Orlando,
I'm
and it's
guessing. Yeah.
probably out in the country
Yep.
doing that. And that's pretty impressive. Like I said, you get on that train. They have full Wi-Fi all through the thing. You sit at basically a table. There's like 4 people
Yeah.
have seats around a table, and you
Yeah.
can work.
That's the way Acela is. Acela's that way too.
Yeah, and they've got cell phone chargers and plugins for your laptop, everything. You can work the whole time. They also have people running around selling drinks and snacks and all of that constantly. And there's an upgraded version. I only rode in the regular coach class, but they
Right.
have a more first class section as well. I think you get free booze, you know. Um,
And the
I'm not
bar. Yeah.
100% on that part. Okay, don't quote me on that. I'm not
Right.
100%, but I think that like when you fly first class, you usually get free alcohol.
Yeah, I know.
And but see, as a non-drinker, it's not a real big perk for me. But
Yeah.
even though you see alcohol behind me, that's just because of some of the work I do.
Yeah.
But anyways,
I like a mimosa in the morning. Thank you.
there you go. There you go. Um, yeah, on average, the Brightline travels at less than 70 miles per hour, slightly slower than a car on a Florida freeway. The problem is you're traveling those Florida freeways in certain sections, you're going 70. You travel in other sections, it's just bumper to bumper and you're not
Yeah.
moving.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I understand it, but it is a weird villainization. It's like, well, in the same time span that 100 pedestrians died, how many pedestrians also got hit by cars? I mean, to be fair, Miami is one of the 3 worst cities. So the 3 worst cities in America for pedestrians getting killed by cars are Orlando, Miami, and Las Vegas. Okay, but they're also huge tourist locations,
Tourist
right?
areas. Exactly.
And people
People
are out walking
unfamiliar,
around, they're drinking alcohol
distracted.
and having fun,
Yep.
and they wander out into traffic.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a weird thing to vilify in my mind.
Well, that's
I
what
mean,
I thought too. I thought, oh, come on, this is you're going to pick on Republicans because they happen to like bright rail, bright line over the system that's being built out in California, or we know Acela's had its ups and downs, and particularly Amtrak. So yeah, it anyway. I thought you'd enjoy that.
now this is kind of an interesting thing. So somebody from the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund says that one of the reasons and their group is called Fortress Investment. Um, and one of the things is not necessarily to have Brightline to turn a profit by itself, but to serve as a driver to inflate the value of properties all around it. And
This is an issue.
you know,
That's why we're having that debate here in Omaha about the trolley.
oh God,
The whole point of that is not just to provide a convenient way for people to get from midtown to downtown, right? What they found when they did this, we're following a precedent here of what they've done in Minneapolis with the Hiawatha. That's the whole deal here. And they found that when they built that system, they actually encouraged more development along that corridor, and that, of course, raised prices, created jobs, and so on. So it's more than just the antiquated, cute little San Francisco trolley, which it isn't, right? But it's there to provide a economic stimulus of what happens around that trolley. Is that valid? Well, according to what we see in Minneapolis and what we see in some of the developments in California, it is. Will it
yeah,
apply here in Omaha? That's another question we don't know the
yeah.
answer to.
So the same article then accuses them of gentrifying certain neighborhoods by raising the property values, and it's
Yeah, yeah,
like
that's a problem.
gentrification's kind of a weird word. It's like complaining that your property values went up. Now, I understand for some people, if the property values go up so much that it increases your property taxes to the point where your paid off house you can no longer afford, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah,
Okay. But generally, in a lot of communities, if you're old enough, you can get some kind of abatement on property taxes if
yeah,
that's, if you can prove that
yeah.
you're in
Here in
poverty
Nebraska,
and stuff like that.
yeah, here in Nebraska, we call it the homestead exemption, which when you get to a certain age here, you can then file for what's called a homestead exemption. They ask you for all kinds of tax information, what you pay, da 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 da. And if you qualify, they either will ask you to pay a fraction of what you would have normally paid for your property tax, or they'll abate it completely. You don't have to pay it at all. So,
Yeah, I'm just saying that there's some advantages there, and what your property value went up a few $100,000. You know,
well, not here.
no, but you know what I mean when they're talking about down in Miami, though.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Um, it's like if you had that, and I realize it's not a great option to go borrow against your home equity or whatever to
yeah.
cover your taxes, but you've got options. It's not the end of the world. It's like if your property values are going up, your neighborhood's probably getting safer at the same time too. So
You would
it's a
hope, yeah,
weird
yeah.
argument, but anyways, all right. Bill, you wanted to talk
Ruck.
yeah, the road use
Ruck.
charges.
That's a term I just learned. I had a very interesting conversation this week. Let me give you a little background. As many of us know, if we're EV owners, we don't buy gasoline. And because we don't buy gasoline, the money that we would have spent, that portion of which would go to the Federal Highway Trust Fund, isn't collected. We don't pay it, right? So every time, if you own a gasoline car, every time you pull into that station, a portion, and it generally on the average works out to be about 50 cents a gallon, depending on the state. Federal portion of that is about 18 and a half cents. The rest of it's going to be whatever the local state legislature has said it's going to be. So on average, it's about 50 cents across the U.S. That money then is what eventually ends up into the Highway Trust Fund. And
Mhm.
that's the money that is used to then gets distributed to the states to pay for road repair and road construction and bridges and all that kind of stuff that we enjoy as car drivers, right? So people that drive electric vehicles, we don't pay into that fund. So states have been wrestling with this. All the states have been wrestling with, well, God, is it more and more electric vehicles? California, 25% of the cars in California are now electric, right? Here in Nebraska, it's what, 2 or 3, 4%, something like that.
Mhm.
But none of those people pay into that fund. So what the states have said, hey, we're going to have to do something here. We're going to have to find a way to collect money from EV drivers so they pay their fair share of the money that they would have been paying if they'd been, buying gasoline to help keep our roads up, right? And I totally agree with that. So the states have been trying to figure out, how do we do that? A gasoline buyer, they meter themselves. Depending on how much gasoline you buy in a given week or a given month or over the year, you've already metered yourself. You've already paid that tax, right? But EV drivers don't do that. So how do we then meter that? So what states have done, the majority of the states, let's see, we got what, 50 states and so we've got 45 or 46 states that charge or are moving towards charging a flat fee. Here in Nebraska, it went from $75 a fee to $150 that I just recently had to pay for that electric car. So that fund can then go into a version of what I don't know, and I'm still trying to figure this out and why I'm bringing this up. What I don't know is, once I pay that fee, which I just did to my county treasurer, how does that money end up into the Federal Highway Trust Fund? Does it? Or does it just strictly go to the DMV, and from there it gets transferred over to the Department of Transportation, and then they use it to do road repairs and whatever else they're going to do with it? That I don't know. 4 states, and apparently there's a 5th, but the person I was speaking with on the phone on this couldn't remember what the 5th state was. But you have Oregon, you have Virginia, you have Utah, and Hawaii. Those 4 states charge you on what's called, and this was a term I learned, I didn't know they had a term for it, road use charge, or RUC. She kept saying, well, the RUC, what are you talking about, RUC? What is that? Road use charge. So that's just simply every mile you drive, there is a little fee tacked onto that. In the case of Oregon, it's 2 cents. What it is in Virginia and Hawaii and so on, I don't know at this point. But I'm bringing that up because I'm trying to figure out, how do we do this as we move inevitably? I'm sorry for all you gasoline lovers. We're moving eventually to electric. It's going to happen. Now, will it happen when I'm still alive or I'm dust in the earth? I don't know. But we're eventually going to get to that point. How do we keep our roads up? So we need to figure out how to way to collectively, fairly collect that fund. So I'm working on trying to figure out a way to do that that is transparent, that doesn't require you to walk into the DMV or wherever, or the local county treasurer when it's time to pay your taxes on the car. Doesn't require you to write down your odometer reading and hand it over to the person to type into the computer and all that kind of, to automate this thing and to do it fairly. So I'm asking if you would like to help me work on this. I'd be happy to chat with you. You can reach out to me through the website, and I'd like to to see if we can find a way. And I bring this up because we're here in Nebraska, and you think, oh God, that's a flyover state. Who cares about Nebraska? The senator who is pushing this measure to create a flat fee, it is my understanding that what she's advocating for now is a $1,000 fee to cover what we're not paying in our fair share of the road taxes. Do I drive $1,000 worth of travel? And is that on an annual basis? Is that for 5 years? I mean, what is that number based on? I'm still researching that, trying to figure out what it is they're proposing. But this is being advanced by our our senator, federal senator in Washington, D.C. So I'm interested in this. I'd like to come up with a way to do this fairly. Because look, I don't drive that many miles anymore. There was one time I would drive 20, 30,000 miles a year. I don't do that anymore. Now I drive at best 5,000 maybe. So should I be paying that bigger number, or should I, be paying something more in line with what I actually drive? So anyway, this brings up all kinds of security issues and, personal privacy issues and all those kinds of things. But I'd like, if you're interested in kind of chatting with me and helping me come up with an approach that is fair and equitable and, does our share, I'd love to hear from you. So there's my spiel. Thank you.
Well, you look at what like Owen said about like Amazon delivery trucks. They're all EVs, right? They're heavier. They're not driving very fast though.
No.
And but they are, impacting on the roads. But they don't go very far in a given day.
Right. So here's another aspect that brings Nebraska into this. If you'll recall, what was it, last year sometime, the University of Nebraska at Lincoln has a department that was crash testing barriers, highway road barriers, remember? And they took that Rivian and they ran that Rivian, went through one barrier, went through another concrete barrier and over it, and basically it was, survivable. It was amazing. So we haven't.
It was really nice to see the Rivian survive. It didn't do so well for the concrete barrier.
Yeah, exactly. So here's my thought: is that we've already got a Department of Automotive Engineering people here. We bring them into this question because the question becomes, well, electric cars are heavier, and therefore they cause more road wear. Well, that could be true, and let's bring the engineers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln into this to figure out how do we figure out what the damage is that they're doing to the roads, and then adjust whatever that per mile fee is, whether it's 2 cents or 3 cents or penny and a half or whatever they come up with. How do we account for that? In that road fee, so that we're building. So we have the funds to build better barricades, for example, along the interstate, things like that. So yeah, we can bring. That's another reason to kind of get Nebraska interested in this, because we have a senator pushing for what I see as an exorbitant, unfair fee on EV owners that is more or less designed to prevent people from getting into EVs. And then we also have a engineering school here that could be put to task to try to figure out what that weight to wear, weight to wear ratio might be, and consider that. So anyway, there's my spiel.
No, I get it. But even like the thing with the barriers, I mean, still, the Rivian's not doing any more damage than a tractor trailer or a full-size pickup truck.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different. It was pretty impressive how well the Rivian did stand up to hitting the barrier.
It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a safe vehicle. Yeah. I mean, it was more of a testament to that, but I don't know how you create a fair system, because you could look at it, it's like, okay, if the EV is never going to pay road taxes, which isn't true, because you're paying something every year when you re-up on the vehicle.
$150 here just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. But if you only drive 5,000 and let's say an Amazon delivery truck's driving 30,000 miles, that's not really a fair comparison. And your vehicle is, half the weight or a third the weight maybe of one of those. I mean, I don't know how you go about really trying to make that fair.
I should see if I can go over and talk to the Amazon.
So the gas tax.
So
if you think about the gas tax, the heavier your vehicle is, the less fuel efficient it is. So the more fuel it uses, so the more tax it pays.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is kind of that way. Whereas EVs are efficient and,
incredibly so. Hey, I got my volt up to 5.2 kilowatt hours.
Yeah. So it's definitely a better situation.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so hey, reach out, comment maybe below, or go to evworld.com and look me up, or just send email to info@evworld.com and it'll get to me. So
All
there we
right.
are. Anything else we want to talk about?
No, I think we're pretty good today. We've gone a
Okay.
long time today.
Yep.
Anyways, folks, appreciate everybody chiming in. We'll be back next week. I do have an interesting guest coming in on Wednesday, so that would be an interesting thought. You get rewarded for less pollution. Well,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
yeah. I mean, there should be something for that as well.
Yep.
That's kind of one of the big discussions. Anyways,
Well, and they do that in Europe, by the way, because they charge you based on the amount of CO2 your vehicle emits per kilometer. So they have that in a way already figured into their taxation system.
I think we're good for today. All right, well, folks. Well, thanks for chiming in, and we'll be back on Tuesday. Otherwise, have a great weekend.
See ya.